Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. I thought we would talk about another jet that I ended up spading recently, and it is the Nesher. This is a Mirage 5, which is in the Israeli tree, with a lot of stuff stripped out of it, is probably the way to put it. The vehicle is at the same BR as the Mirage 5F, which is in the French tech tree, but it's technically worse than the French Mirage 5F. Not in huge ways in general, but it does make quite a big dint on its performance, especially in ground. Now, I played the Nesher in air, so didn't really matter too much. The basic difference between this and the way that the Mirage 5F plays is they have access to different missiles, which means that your setup is slightly different, but everything else is basically the same. The Nesher doesn't have an RWR, which does affect it, but the Mirage 5F, its RWR isn't really great, and also, as long as you play the Nesher correctly, you won't really need the use of the RWR anyway. There isn't a lot of vehicles around this BR that have very good semi-active radar homing missiles. The ones that I've seen used the most recently are stuff like R3Rs on things like big 21Ss, but they are very easy to dodge if you know they're coming, which should be obvious if you're playing around this BR. So what is this thing? Well, it's a very maneuverable delta wing aircraft with a pretty decent engine on it, meaning that you can actually flip it around and have a good time with it, with two long-range IR missiles. It uses the AIM-9Gs, and also it uses the AIM-9Ds and the Chaff 2s. The Chaff 2s are a lot better than they used to be, but there's not really much point in taking them when the AIM-9Ds are just better. The difference between the D and the G in terms of the game is the AIM-9D has a closed seeker head where the AIM-9G has an open one. What this means is if you are targeting stuff with the AIM-9D, you have a very small circle that you have to lock onto the target with and fire onto, whereas with the AIM-9G, what happens is you can lock onto a target and it gives you a bigger circle which it will stay locked on, so you can actually launch the missile at different angles which go towards the enemy. This is something that's really important when it comes to setting up your missiles, because what it can do is it can mean that your missiles have an easier flight path, and also it means that the enemy might find it harder to actually see the missile coming in, which is the most important thing when it comes to this vehicle. So the Nesher has decent speed. It also has pretty good missiles. It only gets 2 of them, which is not a massive amount, especially at this BR, but you can use them to great effect. And you also have a backup of 30mm cannons. Now, technically, this vehicle is a jet fighter, but it is more designed around the bomber role. It has access to a bunch of bombs, has access to a bunch of rockets, and also some 20mm GAU 4 cannons. Now, I know some people who run the GAU 4s along with the AIM-9Gs. I would say it's not really worth it. They have a different muzzle velocity to the 30mm, and the additional weight is a real problem with this machine, especially against some of the targets that it faces. So what I would say in air is just use this as a air-to-air kind of fighter instead of worrying about the bombs or anything like that. This vehicle doesn't have CCIP, it doesn't have CCRP. As I said, it doesn't really have any internals in terms of the stuff that it has, and the only thing it has is a radar, which is just a radar rangefinder, which, if you've ever used one, is pretty much worthless in terms of the game. So this vehicle really doesn't have a lot. It has the ACM mode, which is quite nice, so you can, see targets and work out how far away you are from them, but generally you're not really going to use that too much because you are quite a fast vehicle. You are faster than most of the things that you see at this BR, so therefore you can just set up on them. So why is this thing kind of annoying to play sometimes, and why is it sometimes an annoying spade? Well, it doesn't have countermeasures, and as we've talked about many times over, there are vehicles which are just sat at 10.0 and 10.3. The F104J is one of them, the Nesher is one of them, the J35D is one of them, stuff like the F1 and the T2, even though those got moved down, they are also some of them. And they're in this weird miasma where generally they don't feel great to play because of the fact you can at any point have somebody set up on you and you cannot stop them because you don't have countermeasures. Now, the Delta Wing aircraft, like the Nesher, actually are better to deal with in terms of this than the other ones, because they can actually dodge quite effectively with their very aggressive elevator. This does mean that once you do start dodging missiles, though, you lose a lot of energy and you are committed to the dogfight. So what is more important in all of these vehicles is the setup. The setup is the most important part by a lot. And if you can't get the setup right, which means the initial engagement setup when all of your team is going in and you have to go in too afterwards, then you're going to struggle in stuff like this. It's never going to go well. It's always going to go badly, unfortunately. So with this thing, with the Nesher, the way that I played it is generally I went to kind of like the side of the map, around about 2,000 meters, because I didn't want to go too high because this thing just can't joust, it can't do anything like that. So around about 2,000 meters, waited for the initial engagement, and then after that had a look for targets which didn't have access to countermeasures, which I knew I could, basically go after, and then help with secondary fights with teammates against stuff like F5s, which I would see quite a lot, and also stuff like F4s and even other machines. And this seemed to work pretty well. The thing about an AIM-9G, and the AIM-9G I really enjoy in the game. I think it's a fantastic missile at most of the BRs it's at. It's basically a missile that you can rely on, which can go at around about 3 kilometers. Most missiles, we talked about the AIM-9J before, right? The AIM-9J is a missile which is a little bit less range than stuff like the AIM-9G. And if you're on a platform like, let's say, an F-104J or even the Nesher, the AIM-9J is going to be okay, but it's going to be nowhere near as good as the AIM-9G, because the G just has a longer range you can fire from. And what this means is you can set up targets better, and people don't know the missiles are coming. And that is the most important part. When you are a vehicle which relies on enemies not knowing you're there, the best thing to do is to have a set of weaponry where you fire from miles away, and that's what you do in the Nesher. You set up from about 2.5 to 3 kilometers away, usually around above the target or around that area, and then you fire the missile and pull off, so therefore they don't see you coming and they don't see the missile coming. You can easily do this because you have a very, very good engine on this, and it can work very well. But if you are ever attacked upon, then of course you can't defend yourself, and that just really feels awful. In terms of like ground RB or in terms of any other game mode, I don't see where this thing would be very useful. And also, as we said, at the end of the day, this is just a worse Mirage 5F because it doesn't have as many bells and whistles. And that is kind of a problem with the Israeli tree overall. There are a lot of vehicles here, such as the Shahak, the Nesher, even stuff like the Super Mystère or the SAR, the A4s, apart from the AE and all of the earlier ones, where they're just either the same or worse versions of what you see in other areas, and it's kind of annoying to get them sorted out. The other thing I would say about the Nesher, which is interesting, is the missiles are not mounted straight. So they're mounted at an angle, so your seeker head for the missiles is also mounted at an angle. So you will actually have to pitch up your plane above the enemy to be able to get the lock on the missile. This is not present on a lot of vehicles, but it is something that at least makes it different. So would I recommend the Nesher? Not really. I think the Shahak is better than it. It has obviously the AIM-9Ds, but it has the big old Matra R530E, which is super fun to use, and also the standard 530, which isn't very fun to use. You have the Kurnas, you have the Ayit, you have all of these vehicles to be able to play at this rank, and they're just so much more fun to play and have access to so much more stuff. The Nesher really does feel like it just doesn't have enough to garner attention, and that is the most unfortunate part. Now, when it comes to grinding the Nesher itself, I played 41 battles in it, 59% win rate, 86 air kills, and 20 deaths. So we went for a 4-1, we were getting 2 kills a match with mainly just the AIM-9Gs, but at the same time, it didn't really feel satisfying because you always have a monkey on your back. You know that somebody is going to turn up and just twat you every so often with a missile that you can't do anything about. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank GMG Smiley, CD Beans, Chieftain Mike, EMN3 Galaxy, Tulio Pontecorvo, Brendan Quinn, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Ozzy Panzer, Alan Hacker, Liam Shear, Opium Prime, Lafouche, Sem, Aslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.